good to see you. Thank you for joining me again. I've got another army for you today because the Odds and Sods challenge is nearing the close. I'm running out of figures to paint, which was exactly the point. I'm not running out of figures to paint, I've got loads of figures to paint. Running out of figures in my unfinished armies to paint, which was exactly the intention of this challenge. So thank you, Dave Gilson, Snicket's Tale on Blogger. Thank you for running this challenge. It's been a good incentive for me to get the stuff done that I need to get done. I've cheated slightly this month because I'm running out of figures to paint. The theme for this month was magic. How many magic users left to paint? Done those. And last month I painted my dwarf slayers for the Crazy Loonies challenge. And this month I wanted to carry on and finish off my dwarfs. So I finished off my dwarfs. But cheap because you're not supposed to do the same species, race, whatever you want to call it, type of figure 2 months running. But the point of doing this challenge is to motivate me to finish my armies, and as I've been motivated to finish my dwarves, challenge accomplished in my books anyway. It's not like there's a prize or anything for doing it properly. So I have done my dwarves. Now, I never really intended to do a dwarf army. I intended to have a little dwarf contingent because I'm not really a big fan of dwarves. So there are some dwarves that I love, like the Marauder Longbeards with their weapons and their massive great beards are something that I've been a fan of for a long time. But generally, I'm not really a big fan of dwarves, and I didn't want like a 3,000 point dwarf army. That was never a goal. So I painted a few figures up for actually it was the Woods game that we played at Bring Out Your Lead a few years ago, called the Siege of Brewer's Droop, and some very friendly, nice people joined me in that game, and I hope they had fun with it. And that was a small dwarf contingent trying to fend off some goblins trying to steal their ale, and so for that I painted about a dozen dwarf figures, and I chose dwarfs for that, partly because I had some of the Marauder figures, and as I mentioned, I quite like the Marauder figures, but also the castle that I was using for Brewer's Droop was built out of resin bits from Scotia Grenville, and the doors are all quite short, so I thought dwarfs would be the perfect model to have in that context. It looks like the fairly sort of squat, broad fortress that I built was designed with dwarfs in mind, so that worked totally fine. But then, as I had these dwarfs on the side, I thought maybe I could expand that contingent and have it as like an allied contingent to my Empire forces. And I'd already done the dwarf artillery for my Chaos army, but painted not absolutely in the colours of my Chaos army because I wanted them to be useful also as a dwarf artillery battery for my Empire forces. So I had them as an allied contingent or an enemy contingent, depending on which kind of game I was playing. And then I was at Colours last year, and there was a guy who was selling some of the former Harlequin dwarf miniatures as recast by, as now supplied by Black Tree Designs, who I got an order from recently. That was exciting. I got an order through from Black Tree Designs, something that according to public record doesn't happen all that often, but I did manage to get one through, so thank you, Black Tree, for sending my goblins through, and we'll talk about those maybe in the next video because they're over there and I'm excited to talk about them. But I'm sticking with dwarfs for today, so yeah, I picked up the former Harlequin figures. He was selling them quite cheaply, so I got an organ gun and a flame cannon to add to my artillery battery, and then I picked up some handgunners for thunderers, and some crossbow types and some knights. I didn't want very many sort of dwarfish warriors. The idea of the crossbows and the handguns is that they continue to be a ranged sort of technology focused battery rather than range focused device centered. It seems to fit with dwarfs as like engineers and artificers to me, that they should have these, and yes, they're going to have are regular warriors alongside them, but I wanted them to have that kind of distinctive thing about their personality. You look at dwarves in folklore, they're all they're smiths, and they're metal workers, and they're jewelers, and they're people who weave magical artifacts and produce magical artifacts. So I wanted that to be a part of them, which is why I kind of am getting away with the magic theme, I guess. Although that's my plan anyway. The dwarves are sort of inherently magical, even though Games Workshop in, was it 4th edition, decided that they didn't have any magic, and then gave them runesmiths which do magic but inherit in items, which I guess is the same thing, right? It's that kind of artificer idea. And I had some dwarfs from Raupartha Europe as well in that lot, and they looked nice alongside the Harlequin models and the Marauder models, and then I had a few other sort of little bits and pieces kicking around. Plus, of course, I had my Slayers that I managed to acquire fairly recently and get painted up last month. So it's ended up being quite a nice little contingent. And all of my dwarfs in the Brewer's Droop game were named after prog rock bands or folk bands, albums, that kind of thing. So I've tried to kind of continue that, and you can't see, I haven't written names on any of the bases. I'm going to decide later how I want to put nameplates on these. I want to keep the characters named, but I don't know whether I'm going to then name every figure in the army, or whether I'll just, pick out champions. But then there are some models that I named for the Brewer's Droop game that are not going to be champions, they're going to be regulars in a unit, and I don't want to lose the track of their names because I think they're funny and quite cool. So maybe I will have to end up naming every single dwarf, but does that mean that I then have to name every single model in my Empire army? Who knows? Where does it stop? Where does the continuity thing stop? I don't know. Anyway, we'll find out. So these are mainly Harlequin models, a few Citadel, a couple of Foundry, some Raupartha Europe figures, a couple of Asgard figures from Viking Forge, although alternative armies now sell them in the UK, so they're easier to get hold of, and they're probably better castings because Gavin's remastered all the moulds, whereas Viking Forge I think we're just using old moulds. And so my nice Asgard dwarfs, in fact the Asgard dwarf that's got like the dragon on his helmet and his pointing is probably my favourite dwarf model ever. But the casting is not brilliant, and the crossbowman is kind of missing half his face. I had to sort of paint that back in, and I can't really bring myself to buy another copy from Alternative Armies to replace it, especially now it's painted, so I think I'll just leave it as it is, but it is a shame that it's not a perfect casting. And I seem to have acquired a Nick Lund portable crossbow that I'm counting as a bolt thrower. I don't know how I acquired him. I mean, he's an ex-Grenadier figure, right, so he's available from Full On Hope and possibly Battle Zone and possibly Merliton as well. I haven't really looked. People who know me know that I'm not a big Nick Lund fan. General blobbiness and lack of detail is not something that I look for even in an old hammer sculpt. But I had these guys, so I thought I might as well paint them up rather than sort of trying to give them to somebody else. They were not a complete lot. I had to remodel the bolt on top of the bolt thrower, and the arms of the crossbow were not present, so I had to find something else to put that in place. So it was a bit of a repair job, but it's done, and they'll probably be hideously effective in the army now. Now that I've said that I don't like them very much, or maybe they'll shoot my own forces in the back. Who knows? But yeah, I thought might as well paint them up as I have them. Now it's not quite complete. I'm filming this on Saturday, and tomorrow a Kickstarter that's being run by some friends through Macrocosm completes for some Landsknechte mercenary dwarf. So unfortunately that will be too late for you to get those models through Kickstarter by the time this video goes up. I should have put this up last week, but I didn't have time to film it. Other things going on. but I have pledged for a bank of spearmen, because I think I think a nice big block of pikemen would also round the army off quite nicely. I've got my elite warriors, I've got my missile troops, just a solid block of pikemen to stand in the entrance gate of the castle and ward off attackers is probably feels like a thing that should fit in this dwarf army. So I'm going to do that. But that is going to mean that I need a command group for them, so I'm going to need a champion. I haven't really got any standards in this army, and that's kind of deliberate, because I don't know that I see dwarves and standards as going hand in hand, but maybe the pikemen, because they've got the height anyway, maybe they should have a like a really big, just the core dwarf banner that's got just a list of all of the conquests of the dwarves, all of the achievements of the dwarves or something. Maybe I find something engineering or Leonardo da Vinci-ish to put on, rather than the sort of standard hammer anvil thing. I don't know, I haven't decided yet, but I need a good standard model for that unit. I might lengthen, when the models arrive, I might see how long the spears actually are, because they look quite long, but I think it'd be fun to have these really short, sturdy dwarf troops with really, really long pikes, or as long as I can fit on my shelf here. It'll be a bitch to transport possibly, but when's that ever stopped anyone doing anything? I need a musician for them as well, but I've got a couple of these extra Harlequin dwarf drummers that I think will match. I have actually seen the spearman figures previously, because I did the conversion for the Kickstarter. That's the rifle, or the handgun variant. I did those from the sculpts that Alessio had already supplied. I just made a variant on it, so I have seen them, and I think they'll fit quite nicely alongside the Marauder, but also the Harlequin. So maybe I will use him, but that would mean having a duplicate model in the army. I have got duplicates. I've got some of the plastic clansman dwarfs, but other than that, and a couple of the Harlequin models are duplicates, so it's not too big a deal if I have a duplicate drummer in there. It's just maybe it'd be interesting to have some difference. I had thought, though, actually, going back to the prog rock sort of associations, one of the things that I would like to do is have two models in the army that are called Tom Heartmother. So I thought maybe both of my drummers could be looking very similar, and they could both be called Tom Heartmother, so that you can look at one and say, that's a Tom Heartmother. That's a joke. Haha, that's a hilarious dad joke for people who are of that age and who know what I'm talking about. It's all full of puns, because for me, Old Hammer should be all full of puns, right? And there's no sense in having an army that doesn't have sort of tongue-in-cheek sense of humour, so the puns are important to me, and there are lots of them throughout the army, and maybe I shall take some photos of those various puns in action at some point. But yes, I'm not opposed to having one of these drummers, but I do also need a champion for that unit, which is stumping me a little bit. So maybe if you've got any suggestions for like Marauder Dwarf compatible standards and champions, I'm going to need one of each of those. I think maybe Bood, they've got some. My artillery guys, a lot of them are assault group, so maybe the assault group has some. I'll have to keep an eye out, but yeah, if you've got any suggestions, stick them in the comments below, and then I can actually finish this army. But for the moment, it's another painted shelf. I'm quite happy with that. And next week, I'll show you an unpainted shelf that I'm really excited about. So, join me again. In the meantime, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next week.